Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're just going to give it a minute to make sure that everyone who wants to has a chance to join us for our last lesson today, although stick around next week because we have some exam prep stuff for next week for you. But we're just going to give it a minute so that everyone who wants to can join. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Dawn Knight. I'm an English teacher at Westfield High School in Westfield, Indiana, just north of Indianapolis. We're going to start today by going over the AP exam practice from yesterday, as we usually do. Once again, don't worry if you didn't do the lesson. This will still be beneficial to you. So yesterday we talked about the importance of having transitions in your writing, not just from paragraph to paragraph, but from one example to the next example, from your example to your commentary, and even from sentence to sentence. We talked about transition words like we've been talking about, like similarly and next, and how those are fine, but that it's better to use references of known information and then providing new information in that same sentence to extend the new idea and transition from one to the next. So your assignment was to write transitions for this student sample in 4 places using words or phrases. We're going to just look at these a couple of sentences at a time. So first we're going to read the first 2 sentences here so that you, or the second and third sentences here, so that you can see the transition from one to the next, from the original to the new one that was rewritten. And obviously we can't see yours, but if you take a look at our sample, that might give you a good idea of what you did and if you did a good job of transitioning. So let's read these 2 sentences. She states the past, the Berlin Wall is now a memory, then a hypothetical, we could be satisfied with that, and then America's continued work creating a future and building world peace. This is a powerful way to allude to the idea that accomplishing is not enough. We must never stop trying to get better. Okay, now let's look at how we can transition. She states the past, the Berlin Wall is now a memory, then a hypothetical, we could be satisfied with that, and then America's continued work, creating a future and building world peace. This powerful form of presenting what has been accomplished, then a hypothetical paired with reality, is a powerful way to allude to the idea that accomplishing is not enough. We must never stop trying to get better. So you see this is color coded so that the known information is in orange and the new information is in blue. So that orange transitions us from that previous sentence with something that we already know into new information. Now let's look at sentences 4 and 5 together. Her statements engender awe and pride in her audience for the progress of America once. Albright wants her audience to understand that this continued effort is optional. We could be enjoying our technological advancements while ignoring the world. She forces her audience to acknowledge the America is going above and beyond something hard to do but accomplishable. Excuse the typos in there. This is a student sample. All right, now let's look at the transitions. Without the hypothetical, her statements engender awe and pride in her audience for the progress of America once. Albright wants her audience to understand that this continued effort is optional. We could be enjoying our technological advancements while ignoring the world. By adding the hypothetical, she forces her audience to acknowledge the America is going above and beyond something hard to do but accomplishable. Okay, so again, we're illustrating that we can connect one idea to the next here with these transitions from information we already had to new information. But also, if you remember a couple of lessons ago, we talked about relationships and having those relationships that carry throughout. And this is helping establish those relationships as well that connects all of the pieces. Okay, and finally, here is the last sentence without a transition. Albright provides a series of personal anecdotes of what women across the world are doing. And then with a transition, Albright, having gotten the gears in the minds of the audience turning on what they maybe can do regarding women's rights, follows up with a series of personal anecdotes of what women across the world are doing. And keep in mind that this is the first sentence of the next paragraph. So this transition is actually moving us from the previous paragraph into the next and making those connections and showing those relationships as well. And also, just so you know, this student did get that point for sophistication because of things like transitions and connecting ideas, showing those relationships and adding that depth. Okay, let's take a look at what we're doing today. So today's lesson is about improving language choice and varying sentence structure. So we're going to look at how to be more concise in your writing by eliminating redundant words, combining sentences, using more precise language, using active voice. And we're also going to look at how to vary our sentence structure or syntax by looking at the different types of sentence structures, looking at how to use some adverbs and phrases, inverting the sentence order. And I laughed earlier, maybe it was kind of poor planning on our part to do this kind of grammar-y lesson the very last day, because it's not everyone's favorite. But I think it'll make sense. It's not going to be something where you have to label what a sentence is called. We're just going through those things so that you can see how they work. So hopefully it won't be too painful. Okay, so first a little bit about what you need to know. First of all, why are we doing a lesson on this? One is for clarity. The audience really needs to be able to understand the message you're conveying, and writing concisely and with precise language can help with that. Also, we vary sentence structure for fluency to better connect sentences and ideas. And finally, for sophistication, when you vary your sentence structure and it adds style and sophistication to your writing. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is how to be more concise. And basically what this means is that, when there are too many words, your audience may not really be able to find your message because it's lost in all of the verbiage. So instead, we can be concise by eliminating extraneous words, avoiding redundancies, combining sentences, and using more precise language. So let's look at eliminating extraneous words or redundancies. So I have a sample sentence at the top. This morning at 9 a.m., I'm going to really work on my homework, which is due at a later time tomorrow so I can get better grades. There are a lot of words there, and the message is kind of lost. Now, if you look at eliminating those extraneous words, we get to, at 9 a.m., I'm going to work on my homework so I can get better grades. Now there's much more clarity. And that's really all that means. All right, now let's look at combining sentences using basic conjunctions to be more concise and for fluency. So if you look at on the left side, there are just some of your basic conjunctions that join words. On the right, we have again some sample sentences that we're going to combine using those conjunctions. So the first one, my mom went to the grocery store. I also went to the grocery store. Instead, we can combine it with a simple conjunction. My mom and I went to the grocery store. The second one, should we go to the grocery store? Should we go to the department store? Instead, should we go to the grocery store or the department store? And I know some of these, this is the really kind of pared down version. We're going to look at it in a rhetorical analysis essay later and in a piece of fiction, just so you can see these at work. But I wanted to make sure you kind of understood what we were working on first. Okay, the last one. We should do all our homework. Doing our homework means we will be better prepared for the exam. Instead, we should do all our homework, for that means we will be better prepared for the exam. Or you could say because we will be better prepared for the exam. Okay. We can also combine sentences that have the same subjects and verbs into one sentence so that it's not as choppy. So cats are pets. Cats are good companions. Instead, we can say cats are pets that make good companions. So if you have the same subject, cats, and the same verb, are, we can just combine those two things into one. Cats are pets that make good companions. Another thing we can do is add appositive phrases. So I feel like this is one where you might be like, I remember hearing about phrases in an English class at one time, but I don't remember what an appositive is. We're not going to take a test over labeling phrases right now or anything like that. And a positive is just giving more information about a noun or a subject in the sentence. So you can rename or identify another noun. So for example, my aunt has won several Oscar awards. My aunt is a famous movie star. No, this is not true. So instead, I can do this as a positive phrase instead of a complete sentence for that second one. So my aunt, comma, a famous movie star, comma, has won several Oscar awards. Now a famous movie star is a positive phrase just describing my aunt. Okay, it flows better, it takes up fewer words, it's just a little more clear for the audience. And a lot of times you do these things, you may not know you're doing in a positive phrase, you just are. Okay, another way to be more concise and to add clarity is by replacing vague words or phrases with clearer ones. You especially want to avoid generic words and phrases like really, a lot, very, stuff, things, and instead replace them with something more specific, and that's using more precise language. If you look at the example here, I am very upset without concerts to go to and stuff. Instead, we could say, I am miserable without concerts and sporting events to attend. And I hope that's not the case. I hope you're finding other ways to do, distract yourselves. I am not good at things. You probably are good at some things. Instead, what are you not good at? Baking. I'm not good at baking. I'm not having a great day. Instead, I'm struggling to finish work today. Notice with each of these, we suddenly have more information. It's not a lot more words, it's just more specific, and we have a much clearer idea of what's going on. Finally, they have a tough relationship. Instead, they have a hard time communicating without losing patience. So see, in each of those cases, the message for the audience is much clearer. Another way that we can eliminate some extraneous words and also make our message more clear is through using active voice. And again, this might be something that sounds familiar, but you don't remember quite what it is. Active voice just means that the subject is the one doing the action instead of the action being done to the subject. So the act was being voted on by Congress. Instead, we can say Congress voted on the act. Notice that it's fewer words. It makes it a little more clear to the audience, especially when it's couched inside a bunch of other words. The homework was being done by the students who were more successful. Instead, the more successful students did the homework. Okay, so again, you can get the idea of how using active voice is fewer words. Now that doesn't mean that you should always have active voice. Sometimes whatever it is that's at the beginning is what we want to emphasize. So we might need to move into passive voice occasionally, but you want most of it to be active voice. And again, I know this is a lot of grammar. I'm not going to have you identify what these different things are. I'm just giving you some tools in the toolbox to help you improve your writing. All right, now we're going to talk about sentence variety. When sentences are all the same length, nothing really stands out. And when you have too many short sentences, it sounds choppy. On the other hand, if you have too many really long sentences, it sounds rambling. So to fix this, we can use different types of sentence structures, start sentences with adverbs, use some phrases, or even invert the sentence order. And the idea here is just to get variety. So on the left, you see the picture of the chairs there. That's kind of what happens when we have the same sentence over and over and over again, subject, verb, subject, verb, subject, verb. On the right, we see all of the different chairs. It's much more interesting, and that's what it's like when we vary our sentence structure. Okay, so just 3 more slides of grammar-ish kind of stuff, and then we'll move on. So one of the ways you can add variety to your writing is simply by using different sentence structures. So if you look on this slide, you'll see that a sentence structure is the way we put a sentence together, and there are 4 basic types. They're made up of clauses. So a clause has a subject and verb. And an independent clause can stand alone as a sentence. So I go to the store has the subject I, it has the verb go, and it expresses a complete thought. So that's a sentence. It's an independent clause. A subordinate or dependent clause has a subject and verb, but it doesn't express a complete thought. It can't stand alone as a sentence. Like, before I go to the store. Well, what about it? You have to finish that. It's not a complete thought. So the 4 different sentence structures are just basically how we combine those. They have to have an independent clause in order to be a sentence. But we might have more than one independent clause. We might have a subordinate clause or 2 thrown in there. That's how we vary our sentence structure. So you can look on the slide here and see a simple sentence is 1 independent clause. A compound sentence is 2 independent clauses. I go to the store and I buy donuts. We have 2 complete sentences there that we're joining with that conjunction and. You can also do a complex sentence that starts off with a subordinate clause, one that doesn't express a complete thought. Before I'm going to the store, or because I am going to the store, and then you have the complete thought, I will buy donuts. Or because I'm going to the store, I will buy donuts and I will pick up a newspaper. So that's a compound complex sentence because it includes 2 independent and 1 or more subordinate. Again, nobody's asking you to count how many of these you have in your sentences or label what they are. I just wanted to show you the reason that your English teachers show you these things is that this is a really good way to avoid having really boring sentences that sound all the same. So if you constantly use the short, choppy sentences, it's just a series of independent clauses. The writing doesn't flow and it isn't sophisticated. However, you can also send an important message when you include a short, abrupt sentence after several long sentences. If you remember a few lessons back, we read Patrick Henry's speech to the Virginia Convention, and he had a lot of long flowing sentences in there. But then there was one really abrupt, we must fight. That would be an independent clause. Because it followed all of these long flowing sentences, it sounded very abrupt and it helped convey the urgency of his message. So it was an important time to use an independent, just one independent clause, a simple sentence. So just kind of keep those things in mind. It's not wrong to use one independent, a simple sentence. We just want to make sure that we're varying. Okay, let's look at some other ways we can help vary our sentence structures. You can also start with an adverb or add phrases to add some variety to your sentences. So let's look at the example of what we wouldn't want to do. John went to the store, he bought some ingredients, he made a nice dinner, his friends came over too, they ate the meal, they were all satisfied, then they sat and talked. That's like the picture of the chairs that are all the same. A phrase is just a group of words that it's either missing a subject or a verb. There are several different kinds of phrases that we're not going to get into today, but you probably remember some like prepositional phrases, infinitive phrases, or the appositive phrases that we talked about earlier. You can add in some of those phrases to help add some variety to your sentences. Again, you can combine some sentences, add phrases, vary the sentence structure, or you can start with an adverb like later. Okay, so let's look at the revision. The boy went to the store to buy the ingredients he needed for a nice dinner. Later, his friends came over to enjoy it with him. By the end of the meal, they were all satisfied. So you see some phrases and an adverb later there in the green highlight that shows you how adding those really varied the way these sentences flowed. Okay, finally, you can invert the sentence order. It's basically the idea that a subject is typically subject, verb, object. That's the most basic sentence structure, or the most basic is subject verb. But subject verb object is a very basic sentence structure. If you invert the order so that the subject comes after the verb, it changes it up a little bit. So instead of something like, you should not go in the water until you learn how to swim, you could say, not until you learn how to swim should you go in the water. Now, you wouldn't want to do this all the time because you sound like Yoda. And it typically takes a few more words to do it. Again, sometimes it's because you want to emphasize a different part of the sentence, but it can also add some variety. Okay, so that's it for the grammar. We're going to practice this. So this is a good time for you to pause here and use some of the techniques we discussed. I listed them off to the left there for you. And there's a copy of this slide in today's resources that you can get in the resource link in the video description if you want to print it and do this. So feel free to pause the feed here and take as much time as you want to do on this activity. We'll go ahead and move on. We're going to take a look at what it might look like. And again, your answers might vary, but feel free to pause here and take as much time as you want to take a look at this activity, and we'll move on. All right, so let's take a look at a sample revision. And again, yours might look different. I kept the original here and just tracked changes so that you could see what did change and how it changed. So one of the ways Leonard Friedman conveys his message that the US can't compete against other countries or remain a world power if it doesn't stop emphasizing athleticism over intellect is by appealing to the patriotism of his audience. All right, so notice we just got rid of many because we didn't need that. It was extraneous. He does this by comparing the US to other world powers. So in the world was extra information, and instead of being vague about countries, we're specifically focused on world powers here. So we're using more precise language. For example, he writes, in most industrialized nations, not least of all our economic rivals in East Asia, a kid who studies hard is lauded and held up as an example to other students. This is a stark contrast to the US, where Friedman explained, even at a prestigious academic institution like Harvard, anti-intellectualism is rampant. So there were a few different things there. We added in, for example, so we put a phrase at the beginning, which also helps us transition. We also included some transition and showed a relationship with this is a stark contrast. We got rid of before this and combined sentences here. Okay, now let's look at the next section. This is even more evident when he compares American professors to those in other countries. In the US, Friedman points out Americans value professional athletes, while in other countries it is professors who enjoy that kind of prestige and reward. Okay, so we did some sentence combining, we added in a phrase, we got rid of some extraneous words there. The typical American takes pride in the fact that the United States is a major economic player in the global economy and would worry if they thought its place were in danger, a message that would appeal to their patriotism, maybe even causing a shift in the way they see intellectuals, not as circus freaks, but as the very foundation of the country's status. Okay, so we got rid of a bunch of short, choppy sentences there and combined them. Friedman's use of comparison to appeal to patriotism is an effective way to persuade the American people that they must shift in their priorities from athleticism to intellectualism, or at the very least, to stop being anti-intellectual. Okay, so yours might have varied a little bit, and that's totally fine. It's the idea of trying. How can we make this a little more clear for our audience, adding in more precise language, using more active voice, varying our sentence structure, and using some of those other techniques. All right, so we looked at being concise today and some of the techniques for doing that. We looked at varying our sentence structure. All of these help improve our clarity, add some sophistication to our writing. All right, that brings us to today's AP exam practice. This is a section from F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. And some of you have probably read this in your English class, and that's for a very good reason. He's a master of writing, of using language. So even though this is fiction, you can get a good idea here of how these techniques can add sophistication and paint a more vivid picture for a reader. And since we won't have a warm-up Monday, I did put a marked up sample of this in the resources link so that you could check on your work. Again, you might find and label some different ideas than I have in this sample, and that's totally fine. It's just to give you an idea of some of the ways that writers use these techniques. So what you're doing here is reading this small section from The Great Gatsby and looking for ways that Fitzgerald used those techniques that we talked about today. Okay. I wanted to point out a couple of other things before you leave today. So first of all, I mentioned this, I think, on Wednesday. College Board is partnered with quill.org to provide some online tools for you to use that are free to improve your writing skills. And I actually looked at these a few days ago and practiced with this quill.org/AP site. And basically it does a lot of what we did today. It'll ask you to combine sentences and then give you feedback on how you do that and give you some other lessons to help improve in areas where you're weak. It'll give you kind of a pre-test where it has you do the exercise and then gives you some feedback. So I think this is a really great way if, as you went through the lesson today, you felt like that's really hard, I don't know how to do that, I think this is a great place for you to go to get some extra help. Okay, just a couple of other little things. Next week is prep week. So it'll be our last week of live lessons. We'll be taking practice exams, reviewing practice exams, and getting some last minute tips. So please stick with us next week for that. Also, just a reminder that there is a demo that you can use that shows you how you'll take the exam and how to upload your exam since you're taking it from home. So I put the link on the slide for that demo. You've probably gotten it in an email or maybe your teacher gave it to you as well, but just want to make sure you know it's there. Another reminder is that there's a checklist for you just to make sure that you have everything you need for exam day. So that checklist link is there for you on this slide as well. And some AP open book tips, the link for those. Obviously, these are all on cb.org. And then finally, don't forget that you can go to myap.collegeboard.org where you can access practice questions and links to these live video lessons. I don't know what I was going to say there. You might also want to look at I don't know. I love that I didn't finish that thought. My dog ran away earlier today, and I bet that's what I was working on when it happened. But we found him. No worries. Anyway, so myap.collegeboard.org, there are some questions there that you can take without your teacher assigning. You used to have to wait for the teacher to assign them. Now you can take some practice questions. And when you do, you can also click review and it'll give you kind of what they would be looking for in the rubric for that particular question. All right, so that is it. I want to thank you very much for watching and for hanging out with us for the last few weeks. I hope you'll join us again next week, and I will see you then. Thanks. Have a good day.